I never expected that ordering a piece of furniture would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't about the bookshelf itself, not really. It was about the man who brought it to my door, the one who carried it up 3 flights of stairs as if it were nothing, and in doing so, carried himself right into the quiet, carefully ordered space I called my world. Before him, my life was a collection of neatly arranged days, each one a predictable echo of the last. It was safe, it was calm, and it was profoundly, deeply lonely. My name is Miles, and at 28, I worked from home as a freelance editor. My apartment was my sanctuary and my office, a place where I controlled every variable. The books were alphabetized, the coffee mugs were stacked by color, and my social interactions were mostly confined to emails and the occasional polite nod to my neighbors. It was a life built behind a wall of routine, not because I disliked people, but because I found the unpredictability of them overwhelming. I was an observer by nature and by profession, more comfortable dissecting the emotions on a page than navigating them in person. My building was a pre-war walk-up with charming floors that creaked and neighbors who were mostly quiet, elderly, or both. This also meant it was a constant hub of deliveries. Groceries, packages, furniture, you name it, it was being hauled up and down those narrow, echoing stairwells. That's how I first saw him. His name, I'd learn later, was Caleb. He worked for a local delivery service, the kind that handled everything from a single Amazon box to entire apartment moves. Caleb was, for lack of a more poetic word, built. Not in a gym-sculpted, self-conscious way, but in a functional, capable way that spoke of real work. He had broad shoulders and strong arms that the company polo shirt did very little to hide. His hair was a dark, unruly mess that he was constantly pushing off his forehead with the back of his hand, and he always had a friendly, slightly tired smile for everyone. I'd see him from my window, hefting boxes from the truck, or pass him on the stairs, where he'd unfailingly step aside, murmur a polite, "After you," and offer that easy grin. To me, he was like a character from a different kind of story than the one I was living. He was all motion and energy, grounded and physical. I was all stillness and thought, living inside my own head. He seemed so effortlessly a part of the world, while I often felt like I was watching it through a pane of glass. And, of course, I assumed he was straight. It was a default setting for my brain, a defense mechanism honed over years of quiet crushes and unspoken longings. He was handsome, friendly, and exuded a kind of casual masculinity that felt leagues away from my own quiet, bookish existence. He was, in every sense, unattainable, so I filed him away in that mental box labeled "Look, but don't touch. Don't even hope." My life was missing something, though. My apartment, for all its order, felt bare. I'd been saving for months for a proper, floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. Not some flat-pack nightmare from a big-box store, but a solid wood piece from a local craftsman. It was an indulgence, a monument to the one thing I truly loved, stories. After weeks of deliberation, I finally placed the order. It was ridiculously large, absurdly heavy, and the fulfillment of a long-held dream. The confirmation email said it would be delivered in 2 weeks by a specialized local service. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just started clearing the wall where it would go, my heart thumping with a quiet, nerdy excitement. 2 weeks later, my buzzer rang. I pressed the talk button, my voice steady. "Hello." The voice that came back through the static-laced speaker was familiar, a low and slightly breathless rumble. "Delivery for Miles." It's a big 1 inch." I felt a jolt, a ridiculous, unnecessary flip in my stomach. I knew that voice. I buzzed him in and opened my apartment door, stepping out onto the landing to wait. And there he was, standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me. It was Caleb. He was looking at the massive, wood-crated object on the dolly next to him, then back up at me, a wry, apologetic smile playing on his lips. He was out of his usual company polo and in a plain gray t-shirt that clung to his shoulders. "Third floor, right?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stairwell. I just nodded, my own voice having apparently decided to take a brief vacation. He looked at the crate again, then back at me, that smile widening just a little. "Right. This is going to be fun." That's how it started. Not with a bang, but with the scrape of a dolly on the lobby floor and the quiet dread of 3 flights of stairs. Let me take you back to that moment on the landing. Caleb stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands on his hips, sizing up the crate like a general planning a campaign. I was at the top, feeling utterly useless. The crate wasn't just big, it was a monolith. It looked like it contained a baby grand piano or possibly the Ark of the Covenant. The delivery notes had said curbside delivery, a detail I had conveniently ignored, assuming my own wiry strength and sheer willpower would be enough to wrestle it upstairs. Seeing it in person, I knew I could have willed myself into a hernia and it wouldn't have budged an inch. So, Caleb called up, his voice echoing in the tiled entryway. The paperwork says I just leave it here, but I have a feeling that's not going to work for you. He gestured with his thumb towards the crate. I swallowed, the reality of my poor planning crashing down on me. No, I admitted, my voice coming out a little weaker than I'd hoped. No, that's not ideal. He let out a low chuckle. It wasn't mocking, it was understanding. It was the sound of someone who dealt with people like me, people who lived in their heads and forgot about the practical realities of physics all day long. He started up the stairs, taking them two at a time with an ease that seemed unfair. He stopped a few steps below me, close enough that I could see the faint sheen of sweat on his temples and smell the clean, simple scent of his soap. Look, my shift is officially over the second I get a signature from you, he said, his tone shifting from professional to something more conspiratorial. But there's no way you're getting this thing up here by yourself. And I'd feel like a jerk just leaving it. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I'd figure it out, that I could call a friend a lie, as most of my friends were as bookish as I was and equally unsuited for manual labor. But he held up a hand. Tell you what, he said, his eyes meeting mine directly for what felt like the first time. They were a warm, hazel color, flecked with green. Let me help you. Off the clock. We can probably get it up here and maybe even unboxed before it gets too dark. The offer hung in the air between us, a sudden, unexpected bridge across the gap of our usual polite nods. My mind raced. This was a breach of protocol, both his and mine. He was a delivery guy, I was a customer. There was a clean, simple boundary there. But my alternative was a giant wooden crate holding my dream bookshelf, mocking me from the lobby for the foreseeable future. My desire for the bookshelf warred with my ingrained caution, my fear of imposing, of blurring lines. Hope, a small, treacherous thing, whispered that this was more than just about a bookshelf. I couldn't ask you to do that. I stammered, the automatic, polite refusal tumbling out. You've just finished work, Caleb just shrugged, a simple, powerful movement of his shoulders. I don't mind. Honestly, it's better than going home to an empty apartment and watching bad TV. Plus, he added, a glint of challenge in his eye, I'm curious to see what's in the giant box. His easy charm was disarming. It bypassed all my usual defenses. It made saying yes feel not like an imposition, but like accepting a gift. And so, I found myself agreeing. Okay, I said, the word feeling momentous. Yes, thank you. I can pay you for your time. Of course, he immediately shook his head, a firm, decisive motion. No way. Just, maybe a bottle of cold water when we're done. Deal. He held out a hand, calloused and capable. I hesitated for only a second before taking it. His grip was firm and warm. Deal, I said, and the simple word felt like a contract, sealing an agreement that had very little to do with moving furniture. It was an inciting incident, a disruption to the narrative. The plot of my quiet, predictable life had just taken a very sharp, very unexpected turn. Getting the bookshelf up the stairs was a lesson in physics and cooperation. Caleb was the strategist, tilting the crate this way and that, finding the perfect angles to navigate the tight corners of the stairwell. I was the support, pushing from below, my muscles straining, my breath coming in ragged bursts. We worked in a rhythm of grunts and quiet instructions. Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Lift, and watch your fingers on that corner. There was an intimacy in the shared effort, in the way our bodies had to move in sync to manage the unwieldy weight. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of sawdust and sweat, of the low rumble of his voice right next to my ear. Once inside my apartment, the crate took up nearly the entire living room. We stood on either side of it, breathing heavily, united in our triumph. The air in the room felt different, charged with the energy of our shared labor. All right, Caleb said, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. Phase 1 complete. Now for the fun part. He produced a crowbar from his tool bag like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, and with a few sharp, efficient motions, he pried the lid off the crate. Inside, nestled in a sea of packing material, were the pieces of my beautiful, dark walnut bookshelf. We spent the next 2 hours assembling it. This was where the dynamic shifted from a physical struggle to a more delicate collaboration. We were on our knees on my living room floor, surrounded by wood panels, screws, and incomprehensible instructions. It was here, in the quiet focus of the task, that the silence between us became comfortable, punctuated by moments of connection. This was our shared time, a bubble outside of our normal roles. He talked more than I expected. He wasn't just a friendly delivery guy. There was a depth to him I hadn't anticipated. He told me he was taking night classes in architectural drafting, that the delivery job was just to pay the bills until he could get certified. He said he liked working with his hands, creating something solid and real from a plan on a page. It's kind of like a puzzle, he said, carefully aligning 2 large pieces of wood. You have all these separate parts that don't make much sense on their own, but if you fit them together just right, they become something whole, something useful. I watched his hands as he worked, strong, gentle, and surprisingly precise. He was describing his passion for architecture, but it felt like he was describing something more. This was the revelation. The man I had silently categorized as a simple, physical being had an artist's soul. He had a plan, a dream he was working towards with a quiet determination that I found incredibly attractive. It chipped away at the unattainable label I had placed on him, revealing a person who was complex and thoughtful, someone who understood the satisfaction of building something from scratch. He was more like me than I ever would have guessed. Then came the small, significant moment. It was nothing, really. A tiny event that my brain would later replay on a loop for days. We were both reaching for the same small bag of screws that had rolled under a panel of wood. Our hands brushed against each other in the tight space. It was a brief, accidental touch, skin against skin. But a jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He paused, his fingers still resting on the floor, and looked up at me. His hazel eyes were unreadable for a second, and the air crackled with a sudden, unspoken question. Did you feel that too? He cleared his throat and looked away, grabbing the bag of screws. Sorry, he mumbled, his voice a little rough. My bad. The moment passed as quickly as it had arrived, but it left an imprint. The barrier between us, already weakened, had developed a hairline fracture. We went back to work, but the silence was different now. It was no longer just comfortable, it was aware. Every time our arms brushed, every time we had to lean close to look at the instructions, my skin prickled with a heightened sensitivity. The assembly of the bookshelf was no longer just a task. It had become the framework around which something else entirely was being built. The last screw was tightened just as the sky outside my window began to bleed from blue to a deep, bruised purple. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The bookshelf stood against the wall, tall and solid, and even more beautiful than I had imagined. It looked like it had always been there. We stood up, brushing sawdust from our clothes, a shared sense of accomplishment settling over us. It looks good, Caleb said, his voice soft. Really good. It fits the room. He wasn't just talking about the furniture. He was talking about the space, my space, and for a moment, it felt like he fit in it, too. As if on cue, the distant thunder became a loud crack, and the heavens opened. Rain began to lash against the window panes, a sudden, violent downpour that turned the world outside into a watery blur. Caleb walked to the window and peered out. Wow, he said. That came out of nowhere. I'm going to get soaked on the walk to my truck. I saw my opportunity, a chance to extend this fragile bubble of time we were in. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and anxiety. You should wait it out, I said, the words coming out more confidently than I felt. It's the least I can do. I can make coffee. Or tea. He turned from the window, and that easy smile was back, but it seemed different now, a little less automatic, a little more genuine. Coffee sounds amazing, actually. While I was in the kitchen, fumbling with the coffee maker with slightly trembling hands, I heard a sharp hiss from the living room, followed by a quiet curse. I rushed back in to see Caleb staring at his hand. A thin, bright red line of blood was welling up from a cut on his palm. It's nothing, he said quickly, wrapping it in a paper towel. Just a splinter from the crate, I guess. I didn't even feel it until now. My editor brain, the part of me that is all about fixing things, took over. No, let me see, I insisted, my usual caution overridden by a sudden, fierce need to take care of him. I led him to the bathroom, sat him on the edge of the tub, and opened my medicine cabinet. The space was small, forcing a proximity that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His knee was pressed against mine. I took his hand in mine. It was large and warm, the skin calloused from work, and it made my own hand look pale and delicate in comparison. I ran it under the warm water from the tap, gently washing away the blood. He was perfectly still, his eyes fixed on our hands. I could feel his gaze on me, intense and questioning. My own focus narrowed to the task, to the feeling of his skin under my fingertips. The world outside, the rain, the city, all of it faded away into a dull roar. The only things that existed were this tiny bathroom, the sound of running water, and the weight of his hand in mine. I carefully dried his palm with a clean towel, my touch as gentle as I could make it. Then, I applied a dab of antiseptic ointment. He flinched almost imperceptibly as the cool cream touched his skin. Sorry, I whispered. It might sting a little. He shook his head, his gaze never leaving my face. It's fine, he said, his voice low and thick. I took a bandage from its wrapper and carefully, slowly, wrapped it around his palm. My fingers brushed against his wrist, and I could feel the frantic, rabbit-quick pulse beating there. It matched my own. When I was finished, I didn't let go of his hand right away. My thumb rested on his pulse point. I looked up and finally met his eyes. The space between us was electric, humming with everything that had been building for the past few hours. The shared effort, the quiet revelations, the accidental touch, all of it had led to this. This was the turning point. It was a moment of care so profound, so intensely focused, that it transcended the simple act of bandaging a cut. It was an admission, a confession made without a single word. In the stillness, with the rain drumming against the window, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that nothing would ever be the same between us again. He finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. Thanks, Miles. He said my name like it was something precious, something he was testing on his tongue for the first time. I slowly released his hand, and the loss of contact felt like a physical ache. You're welcome, I managed to say. We stood up at the same time, the small bathroom suddenly feeling impossibly crowded. We had to shuffle past each other to get out, our bodies brushing from shoulder to hip. That brief, total body contact sent a shiver down my spine. The aftermath was thick with a new, unspoken awareness. We drank our coffee in a state of charged silence, sitting on opposite ends of my sofa. The easy conversation we'd shared while building the bookshelf was gone, replaced by a careful, fragile quiet. We both seemed afraid to say the wrong thing, to break the delicate tension that had settled over the room. We would catch each other's eye, then quickly look away, a blush creeping up my neck each time. The rain eventually softened from a downpour to a steady, gentle drizzle. It was an excuse, and we both knew it, but it was time for him to leave. At the door, the awkwardness reached its peak. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Thanks for the coffee. And for this, he held up his bandaged hand. No problem, I replied, my voice too bright. And thank you, again, for all your help. I never would have gotten it up here without you. There was a long pause. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something important. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. In the end, all he said was, "See you around, Miles," and then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stairs, leaving me alone in my apartment with a new bookshelf and a silence that felt louder than ever. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. My internal monologue went into overdrive, analyzing every single second of that evening. I replayed the moment in the bathroom 1,000 times. The way he looked at me, the way his pulse had leaped under my thumb. Had I imagined it? Had I projected my own longing onto a simple act of kindness? The hope that had bloomed in my chest was now locked in a brutal war with my fear of rejection. One moment, I was convinced he felt the same way, that the connection was real and mutual. The next, I was certain I had made him uncomfortable, that I had misread everything and turned a friendly gesture into something awkward and charged. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a stage. The bookshelf dominated the living room, a constant, beautiful reminder of the evening that had unsettled my entire world. Every time I looked at it, I thought of him. I thought of his laugh, the earnest way he talked about his dreams, the warmth of his hand in mine. It was a monument to a connection that might have been entirely in my head. My carefully ordered life was in chaos, my emotions a tangled mess I couldn't edit or organize. I saw him twice in the following week. The first time, he was dropping off a package for my downstairs neighbor. I was on my way out, and we nearly collided on the stairs. We both froze. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi," I squeaked back. The air between us was so thick with unspoken things I felt like I could barely breathe. He gave me a small, hesitant smile, adjusted the box in his arms, and quickly moved past me. No easy grin, no casual chat. Just a new, careful distance that felt like a physical wall. The second time was even worse. I saw his truck parked outside, and I actually ducked back into my apartment, my heart pounding, and waited until he was gone before I left. I was actively avoiding him. I was a coward. I was so terrified of finding out that I had imagined everything, that I would rather live in the agonizing uncertainty than face a potential rejection. The observer in me had taken over completely, but instead of analyzing a manuscript, I was analyzing him, myself, and the space between us, dissecting every glance and non-glance for hidden meaning until I was exhausted. Hope and fear were exhausting dance partners, and I had no idea how to stop the music. 3 more days of this agonizing silence passed. I had resigned myself to the fact that I had probably ruined it. I had taken a simple, kind act and burdened it with the weight of my own desires. He was probably avoiding me, trying to figure out how to let me down gently. I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly at a manuscript about medieval pottery, when my buzzer rang. My stomach plunged. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a wild second, I thought about just ignoring it. But some last, stubborn flicker of hope, propelled me out of my chair. I pressed the talk button, my hand shaking slightly. "Hello." His voice came through the speaker, and it was unmistakable, even through the static. "Miles? It's Caleb. Can I come up for a minute?" My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The confrontation, the clarification, the end of the uncertainty one way or another. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Come up." I buzzed him in and opened my door, my hand gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles were white. I heard his familiar, heavy footsteps on the stairs, and with each step, my anxiety ratcheted higher. He appeared on the landing, looking just as nervous as I felt. He wasn't in his work uniform, just jeans and a dark green sweater. His hair was damp, as if he'd just showered, and he wasn't smiling. He just stood there in my doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor between us. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Hi," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. "Is everything okay?" He finally looked up, and his hazel eyes were filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before. It was the look of someone standing on a precipice, about to take a terrifying leap. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back wordlessly, holding the door open for him. He walked into my living room and stopped in front of the bookshelf, running a hand over the smooth wood. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. Then, he turned to face me. The direct conversation I had been dreading and longing for was about to happen. "I'm sorry I've been weird this past week," he began, his voice rough with emotion. I haven't known what to say. I just stood there, my hands clasped behind my back to keep them from trembling. I let him speak, knowing that whatever he said next would change everything. "The other night," he continued, his eyes locked on mine, "wasn't an accident." "Not really," my brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" He took another deep breath. "The bookshelf. The delivery. I knew it was coming to this address, to you. I saw it on the manifest. And I knew it was a 2-man job, but I requested it. I told my boss my route was light that day, and I could handle it myself." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My mind spun, trying to recontextualize the entire evening. It wasn't a chance encounter. It wasn't a spontaneous offer of help. It was planned. It was deliberate. "Why?" I asked, the single word full of a week's worth of confusion and hope and fear. Caleb took a step closer to me. The space between us shrank, becoming charged and intimate again. "Because I've been noticing you for months, Miles," he confessed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'd see you coming and going. You always have your head in a book, or you look like you're a million miles away, thinking about something. I wanted to talk to you, to actually talk to you, but I never knew how. I'm not good at this," he gestured vaguely between us. I saw the bookshelf delivery as an opportunity. An excuse. It was a stupid, roundabout plan, I know, but it was the only thing I could think of. He had been interested. For months. The thought was so staggering, so completely outside the realm of what I had allowed myself to believe, that I couldn't speak. All that time I had spent watching him from a distance, thinking he was unattainable, he had been watching me, too. He took my silence as a bad sign, and a flicker of panic crossed his face. "And then the other night, when you took care of my hand, the way you looked at me," he trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "I thought maybe. I don't know. But then I got scared. I figured I had to have been imagining it, that I'd crossed a line and made you uncomfortable. So I stayed away. But it's been driving me crazy." He took one more step, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close now I could see the flecks of green in his eyes, could feel the warmth of his body. He gently took my hand, his fingers tracing the lines on my palm. "I'm not imagining this, am I?" he asked, his voice thick with a desperate hope that mirrored my own. "What I felt in that moment, what I think I feel right now? Is it real?" And just like that, all my fear, all my anxiety, all the overthinking and second-guessing, it all just evaporated. It was replaced by a wave of relief, so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I threaded my fingers through his, my grip firm and sure. "It's real," I said, and my voice was finally clear, finally my own. "Caleb, it's very real." A slow smile spread across his face, a real, dazzling smile that reached all the way to his eyes. It was like watching the sun come out from behind the clouds. He brought his other hand up to cup my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin gently. "Good," he whispered, and then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning like I might have imagined. It was confident and sure, a kiss of relief and certainty and the culmination of months of unspoken longing. It was a mutual acknowledgement, a confirmation of everything that had passed between us. It tasted of coffee and courage and the promise of a new beginning. In the quiet of my living room, with the bookshelf he built standing as our witness, I kissed him back, and I felt like I had finally come home. In the weeks that followed our confession, my quiet, orderly world blossomed with color. The carefully constructed walls of my routine didn't crumble, they simply expanded, making room for someone else. Caleb became a fixture in my life, and I in his. Our first official date was a trip to a dusty, sprawling used bookstore, where he listened with rapt attention as I talked about my favorite authors, his gaze more focused on me than on the books. Our second date was him taking me to his drafting class, where he proudly showed me his projects, his hands sketching elegant lines on paper that would one day become buildings. He was building his future, and he was inviting me to watch. He spent more and more time at my apartment. He'd come over after his shift, smelling of fresh air and hard work, and I'd have dinner ready. We would eat and talk for hours, unpacking the stories of our lives. I learned about his childhood in a small town, his complicated relationship with his father, and his secret love for old black and white movies. In turn, I told him about my own quiet upbringing, my passion for language, and my anxieties about the world outside my door. With him, I didn't feel like an observer anymore. I felt seen. I felt like an active participant in my own life. Our relationship developed its own comfortable rhythm. There were lazy Sunday mornings spent in bed, the light filtering through the blinds, his arm draped possessively around my waist. There were evenings spent on the sofa, my legs tangled with his, reading in companionable silence. He didn't just fill the empty spaces in my apartment. He filled the empty spaces in my life that I hadn't even known were there. He brought a sense of groundedness, of easygoing strength that balanced my anxious, overthinking nature. And I, in turn, offered him a place of peace, a quiet harbor where he could rest and be himself after a long day of physical work. We fit together, like the carefully joined pieces of the bookshelf he had built. One evening, a couple of months after that first kiss, we were sitting on the floor, leaning against the sofa, organizing my collection of paperbacks onto the lower shelves of our bookshelf. It was a simple, domestic task, but it felt deeply significant. This piece of furniture, the catalyst for everything, was now something we shared. I handed him a worn copy of a novel, and as he went to place it on the shelf, he paused, looking at his hand. The tiny white scar on his palm from that first night was barely visible, but we both knew it was there. He turned his hand over and looked at me, a soft, affectionate smile on his face. "You know," he said, his voice low and warm, "I think this is the best delivery I ever made." He took my hand and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. In that moment, with the scent of old paper and the warmth of his touch filling my senses, our story was reaffirmed. The grand, romantic gesture wasn't some dramatic declaration. It was this. It was quiet, it was shared, and it was real. It was building a life together, one book, one memory at a time. It's funny how you can live your whole life believing you know exactly who you are and what you need. I thought I needed order, quiet, and solitude to feel safe. I had carefully packaged myself, wrapped myself in layers of caution and routine, and stored myself away on a high shelf where no one could reach me. I never expected that someone would come along with the strength to lift me down, the patience to unbox all my complexities, and the gentleness to unwrap the person I was always meant to be. Sometimes, you have to let someone else into your carefully curated space to realize that the best stories are the ones you write together.